In the glittering shadows of the forbidden city, beneath layers of silk and silence, some men lived as ghosts owned, touched, forgotten. They were the male concubines of imperial China, torn from their homes as boys, stripped of names, desires, and manhood. Many were castrated slowly, without anesthetic, sometimes by their own fathers, seeking favor with the palace. Blood pooled on cold stone floors. Some bled to death. Others survived only to decay in golden cages. They were not lovers. They were symbols, pawns, hidden instruments of politics and pleasure. And though history buried them beneath the grandeur of emperors and empresses, their screams once echoed through royal chambers late into the night. Who were they, really? What did they endure behind those crimson doors no commoner could pass? Their lives were whispered in rumors, carved into temple walls as warnings, then lost, until now. It began with the eunuch system, a practice older than the Ming walls themselves. At first, these men were gatekeepers, scribes, and watchers. But in the darkest corridors of court intrigue, their roles mutated. By the late Ming dynasty, some were no longer just servants, they were kept. Select few, chosen for their beauty or submission, were drawn into private chambers of the emperor or high-ranking nobles. They waited in silence. Dressed in brocade, painted with delicate red on pale skin, their smiles had to be still. Every breath calculated, every glance measured. A misstep meant punishment, disfigurement, or death. And yet, the line between privilege and torment blurred. Some rose in influence, quietly wielding power behind palace curtains. Others faded, used and discarded. No tombstones, no names in records, just fading portraits and ledgers describing tribute boys from the south. What was tribute, really? Loyalty or sacrifice? A life offered for someone else's desire. In the reign of Emperor Wanli, whispers turned into fear. His hidden chambers, it was said, were not just for concubines of silk and scent, but for boys silent, unblinking, waiting. Some were brought from distant provinces, families starving, lured by impossible promises. They were bathed, perfumed, muted by fear. As the emperor aged and retreated deeper into shadows, these boys remained, frozen like dolls beneath layers of painted stories. One records clerk noted a shipment of exceptional youth from Fujian never seen again. Who mourned them? Who prayed for their bodies when sickness or madness took hold? And when the palace was overthrown, when rebels stormed gilded halls screaming for blood and justice, what secrets died with the collapsing ceilings? Among the ashes, charred bones were found. Small, fragile, unnamed, not soldiers, not concubines, something in between. Neither accepted nor erased. Do you feel that chill? That's the past, breathing through the cracks of denial. Long before any throne was carved, ancient texts from the Han dynasty whispered of men offered to emperors not for counsel, but for caress. These mentions were fleeting, scribbled into forgotten court records, erased from official histories. But they existed. In one surviving scroll, a eunuch named Sima is described as the emperor's shadow clouding the moonlight. What does that mean? He was seen always near, never acknowledged, as if love were a scandal, as if pain were sacred. Some say he was bled during every full moon, a ritual of loyalty or control. Sima died young. His body vanished, but rumors whispered that he was buried among the emperor's hunting dogs, no stone, no name. Lost between loyalty and lust, between heaven and shame. And that's the tragedy, isn't it? They were everywhere in the palace, but nowhere in history. Touched by emperors, forgotten by time. Until now, when silence finally starts to speak. Yet the Qing dynasty perfected what the Ming had only begun. Behind the screen of propriety, a darker ritual crystallized. Tribute boys, some as young as 10, were presented under silk canopies, gifts not only of service, but of soft skin and fearful obedience. Imperial agents combed through villages, selecting based on symmetry, voice, and docility. Entire families bowed as their sons were led away, believing it an honor while cursing the moon in private. In the inner courts, the boys lived like whispered secrets. No eye contact, no speech unless spoken to, whipped for flinching, starved for crying. And still, some were favored. Dressed like dolls from forgotten lullabies, they were taught to dance, to sing, to entertain but never to want. Desire was forbidden, especially if it was their own. When the dynasty fell and warlords cannibalized the empire's illusion, these boys, these living relics, were not mourned. Their rooms were sealed, their names never said again, as though they never breathed. But they did. In a hidden chamber beneath the summer palace, a foreign missionary once stumbled upon a journal tattered, blood-stained, sealed behind a brick wall. Its pages revealed a single name, repeated over and over in desperate ink: Liu Tian, a concubine boy of the Daoguang era, given to the prince regent at just 11. The journal was his. He wrote not in bitterness, but in longing for a mother's lullaby, a brother's laughter, a sunrise not framed by iron bars. His final entry ends mid-sentence: "He touched my face today, and I." And then nothing. Silence, as if history itself chose to forget. But that's the crime, isn't it? They were made to vanish, not by time, but by choice. Bit by bit, page by page, their pain was erased to protect emperors from shame, yet their whispers still haunt these places. Slip your ear against the palace walls and listen closely. There between the cracks, do you hear them weeping? Centuries later, after dynasties fell and republics rose, silence clung like mold to the memory of these boys. Their existence stained the honor of emperors who built legacies on golden lies. And so, officials burned records, buried testimonies, repainted murals. Even modern textbooks omit them. History wears a mask grand and noble, concealing the faces of children who were never allowed to grow old. But in 1949, during the final days of civil unrest in Beijing, one archivist risked everything. Hidden inside a hollowed statue of Guanyin, he placed 3 jade amulets inscribed not with names, but with dates. Dates of births, of disappearances, of deaths unmarked. He called them the unheld funerals. Today, scholars find traces in coded poems, smudged ledgers, slivers of clothing wrapped in ceremonial jars, and piece by piece, the mirror cracks. No, the past does not rest. It waits. For truth, for reckoning, for someone, anyone to finally say, they mattered, and they were not forgotten. And what if some survived? Not in body, but in blood. In the DNA of families who could never explain their ancestors' sudden rise, the wealth that came without a name. Some scholars now believe that these concubine boys, silenced and erased, fathered secret lineages through forbidden unions or desperate nights of vulnerability with palace maids. Their descendants walk among us unknowing, unclaimed, yet carrying the phantom ache of what was stolen. A tenderness passed down like a scar. It's not just about vanished boys or shattered dynasties, it's about what we choose to see and what we choose to bury. In the end, the Forbidden City held more than emperors. It held 1,000 broken songs, 1,000 trapped voices. And now, as the stones grow older and the air flickers with memory, maybe for the first time in centuries we can stop pretending they were never there. Maybe, just maybe, silence has spoken loud enough. In an unmarked grave outside Xi'an, archaeologists found the skeleton of a young man, bones too delicate, spine unnaturally curved, pelvic fractures consistent with long-term kneeling. No burial goods, no family name, only a jade hairpin placed where the heart would have been. DNA traced to a southern coastal province far from the palace, far from home. Was he one of them? A boy whose body was used as a vessel for power and then discarded when the dynasty no longer needed beauty wrapped in silence. We may never know. But in that nameless grave lies the final truth of all empires. Not their monuments, not their proclamations, but their victims, the lives silenced to maintain illusion. Look back at that boy, faceless, nameless, spine broken by servitude. Can you forget him? More importantly, should you? Because until we remember them not as shadows but as sons, brothers, children, they will keep haunting the history we try to erase. And still, behind velvet curtains and lacquered doors, the quiet legacy of China's male concubines lingers not in chronicles, but in omission. Their history lives in what's missing, in palace archives where whole decades are oddly blank, in family trees with sudden unexplained branches, in portraits where figures are painted faintly behind the emperor, never acknowledged, in shrines where incense burns for spirits unnamed. We speak of dynasties as if they were built solely by generals and sovereigns, yet it was the suffering of the silenced that propped the thrones up high. Their youth bartered for proximity, their pain transformed into protocol. And so we confront a question more haunting than any answer. How many empires, how many nations were cradled on the backs of those we forced to disappear? Their stories are not just history, they are a mirror. And now that we've seen them, even briefly, we cannot look away, not without becoming part of the silence ourselves. And maybe that's the cruelest truth of all these boys. These ghosts of the court were never meant to be remembered. They were designed to vanish, crafted to serve, suffer, and slip away like incense smoke in imperial halls. But still their echoes remain, not in books, but in feeling, in that strange unease that lingers when you walk past palace relics too ornate for their own innocence, in the stillness of statues, eyes downcast, lips closed, in the silence between the lines of history. And now that silence has broken. Their pain, once locked behind jade doors, slips into our century, asking nothing more than presence. No vengeance, no justice, just acknowledgement. The Forbidden City may still rise with grandeur, but beneath its stones lie stories heavier than gold. If you ever visit, do not look only at the throne. Look down, listen. Somewhere beneath your feet, a boy may be waiting to be remembered, finally. Because in the end, remembrance is the final rebellion, against the emperors who cloaked cruelty in ritual, against the scribes who dipped their brushes only in glory, never in grief, against the centuries that called pain unimportant if it didn't come from a crown. These boys, Liu Tian, Sima, the unnamed child beneath the jade hairpin, they were not just casualties of power, they were warnings of what happens when beauty is possessed, when devotion is coerced, when silence is enforced by fear. Their footprints were swept from palace carpets, their breaths erased from history's scrolls. But tread lightly, because memory is a fragile beast that never fully dies. And today, we have given it breath again. In telling their stories, even through whispers, we remake the world just slightly more whole. So let them linger not as footnotes but as voices, not as shadows, but as boys who once lived, once hoped, and who now, at last, are heard. Their stories are not just woven into whispers of the past, their warnings etched into the very marrow of power. Every empire builds walls to keep its secrets, and behind China's most gilded walls, the cries of boys who were never supposed to speak still echo. What else has history taught us to forget? What names never made it into books because they weren't convenient? These boys, stripped of choice and buried beneath marble and silence, remind us of one thing: power always has a cost, and it is rarely borne by those who wield it. As we close their story, remember, it is not merely their suffering we acknowledge, but the truth that silence is never neutral. The moment we stop listening, we become accomplices to forgetting. But if we remember them, name them, carry their stories forward, then perhaps, just perhaps, we become something more. Not emperors, not chroniclers, but witnesses. And that might be enough. So now, as you stand beneath the watchtowers of the Forbidden City, understand this: history is not made by those who write it, but by those it chooses to forget. And the boys, those fragile lights devoured by centuries of decree and denial, were once very real. Their pain breathed, their hopes died quietly. Not in the wars and coronations etched in stone, but in the cold hush of night, behind silk veils, beneath imperial silence. They existed not to be remembered, and yet we have remembered them. Their stories have crossed centuries like prayers without gods, searching for ears that might finally hear. And perhaps that is all they ever wanted to be seen, not as shame, not as myth, but as boys. Beautiful, broken, and real. Their lives were stolen by power, but today, for a moment, we gave them back their names. And in that fleeting reclamation lies a final act of rebellion, the kind even empires can't erase. So as we walk away from the Forbidden City, its vermilion walls basking in a dying sun, think of all that was never carved in stone. Think of the quiet footsteps that once echoed through its endless courtyards, the laughter never heard, the screams never heeded. These were not side characters in someone else's epic, but the hidden heartbeats of an empire. They remind us that power does not just shape history through triumph and decree, but through what it chooses to silence. To recall them now is not just to pay tribute, it is to reclaim truth from the jaws of omission, and perhaps in doing so, we speak not only for them, but for all whose histories were folded into the dark. Across every empire, every dynasty, every palace and prison, there were boys like them. And now, against all odds, they are no longer invisible. Remember their names, or at least, remember they had them. Because silence, once broken, echoes forever. The footsteps of those boys, bare, trembling, erased, still tread softly beneath our modern myths. They were real. Their anguish was real. Their love, their fear, their longing. No dynasty can bury that forever. And so now, we leave their story not in mournful eulogies, but in something greater, in memory awakened. Let every closed door remind us of the ones locked from within. Let every painted scroll with missing names whisper of those who never stopped existing, only stopped being seen. And as we walk away, eyes open, hearts heavy, know this: remembrance is not an act of pity. It is power, reclaimed by the powerless. Through the cracks of the Forbidden City's stone, through the silence of centuries, their truth rises like smoke toward a sky that finally sees them, not as symbols, not as specters, but as boys who once lived, and who now, forever, will not be unseen. Their legacy now drips from the cracks of every crumbling monument, meant to erase them. Time folds, but it does not forget, and as the dusk swallows the last echoes of emperors, it is not their decrees or victories that remain. It is the fragile radiance of those they tried to hide. Boys who served silently, who breathed in fear and stained royal silks with tears that no chronicle dared record. We look back not in search of sorrow, but of recognition, because in telling their story, we uncover our own capacity to see what empires obscured. And though they were denied candles, tombs, or prayers, they are not in darkness anymore. We carry them now in memory, in story, in truth spoken at last. The Forbidden City still stands, proud and grand, but it is hollowed by echoes, echoes of those who never had a voice until now. Let that echo remain. Let it never die again. And so, as we close the gates of this tale, let the silence speak no more. The story of China's male concubines was never meant to survive, never meant to reach us across the centuries, but it has. Against fire, denial, and erasure, it has returned scarred, but breathing. It returns to remind us that every empire, no matter how golden, is built on someone's absence, someone's sacrifice. In remembering them, we begin to reforge a broken mirror into something more truthful, not perfect, but piercing. So when you next walk any path of history, ask yourself not what was written, but what was erased, whose story was stolen to make another seem whole. And never forget, history is a chorus, not a solitary voice. Let these boys sing again across time, piercing the hush that entombed them. Let their forgotten footsteps guide us not just back but forward, toward a world where silence never wins again. Let that be the final note, the echo that never fades. Their story was stolen, buried beneath lacquered myths and imperial pride, but today it breathes through us, not to reopen wounds, but to prevent their repetition. The Forbidden City still casts long shadows, and within them history waits aching, trembling, yearning to be seen not in splendor, but in sorrow. These boys lived, they bled, they vanished, yet their memory now claws its way back from beneath centuries of forgetfulness. Let their names rise from ash and silence. Let us carry their truth, cracked and holy, as we step beyond these haunted courtyards. For if there is any justice history can offer, it is this, to lift the erased into the light. And now, we have. Their ghosts no longer wander unloved, their cries no longer fall unheard. They are with us, stitched into every breath of truth we dare to speak. They are no longer alone. So let the world remember what history tried to erase. In every empire that dazzled with power, there are shadows soft, tragic, human. The boys of China's imperial twilight were not statistics or symbols. They were breath and bone, innocents sold to preserve sovereignty, hearts wrapped in silk then pierced by silence. This is not just their story, it is a reckoning, a reminder that truth seeps through even the thickest walls. And as this tale returns to silence, may we walk forward more tenderly, more aware of the cost behind golden thrones and porcelain perfection. Not all wounds bleed, some whisper. And those whispers, if we dare to listen, teach us how to remember fiercely, with purpose. The Forbidden City stands quiet tonight, but it is not empty. It holds voices, it holds echoes. And now, so do we. They were real, they were many, and after centuries of silence they are finally heard. Let that echo outlive the throne itself. And so, we close the final curtain on a truth once too fragile to voice. Their legacy needs no monument, for it lives in the courage to finally speak of pain cloaked in silk and gilded shame. The boys' history silenced were not phantoms, they were the marrow of an empire's illusion, the invisible threads binding majesty to horror. To remember them is not simply to look back, it is to unshackle the future from the weight of denial. As long as thrones rise, let them stand not only on stone, but on honesty. Let emperors be remembered not solely for grandeur, but for the shadows their light refused to touch. And when we pass stories forward, may we pass this one, raw and whole. Because to remember the boys of the Forbidden City is to refuse silence, forever. Let them be mourned, let them be honored. Above all, let them be known. Their names were carried away by winds that swept through dynasties, but today they drift back to us faint, aching, and luminous. The silk-wrapped silence that once veiled their existence can no longer hold. In the hallowed gloom of the Forbidden City, their memories rise like incense from altars, never-lit boys who laughed once, cried in the dark, and vanished too early for history to forgive itself. And now, through our telling, they have stepped back into the light. Fragile, yes, but defiant, real. In remembering them, we do not undo the suffering, but we ensure it was not endured in vain. This is the final breath of their truth, exhaled across centuries. Let others speak of battles and conquests, but let us carry this, the quiet rebellion of remembrance, a candle in a room that was once locked from the inside. May it never go out again. Let the record show, the silence has ended. Let these closing words be more than elegy, let them be restoration. The boys erased by gilded shame now walk with us in memory, no longer faceless, no longer forgotten. Their truth has passed through fire and censorship, and still it remains sacred, trembling, undeniable. In the dust of thrones and shards of vanished dynasties, we do not find glory, we find them. And that is enough. Not marble statues or grand memorials, but this, the reclaiming of a voice, a whisper turned into thunder. The story ends here, but its echo carries. Carry it with care, with reverence. And should anyone ask whose story this was, do not point to emperors, generals, or scribes. Point to the shadows, to the silences, to the boys who lived unseen and now rise remembered. Let this be written not in ink, but in truth. A truth that no empire could kill, because now, at last, it belongs to all of us. So carry this story not as burden, but as bond, a thread stitched between the living and the silenced. The tale of China's male concubines is not over, because memory has no end, only keepers, and we, now, are chosen to keep it. Their breaths lost in silk and shadow now move through ours, reshaping the past not to haunt, but to heal. Let every forgotten name be spoken in our silence. Let every extinguished candle be relit in our remembering. And when someone dares to ask if they truly mattered, let us answer with conviction, yes. They mattered. They matter still. For in our witness lies their resurrection, and that is how echoes become voices. That is how shadows, at long last, step into the light. So here, at the final breath of this forgotten history, we stand not as spectators, but as torchbearers. The tale of China's male concubines is not sealed in stone, but kept alive in our choosing to see them in the stillness between words, in the gaps left gaping by centuries of curated silence. Let us not end this with mourning, but with vow, a vow to remain alert to the stories our leaders let slip and our scrolls leave blank. For history is not merely what happened, it is what we choose to carry forward. These boys once stripped of names, now engraved in memory, are no longer shadows behind screens or murmurs lost in imperial chambers. They are part of the truth, stitched deeply into the human tapestry. And if we close this chapter with anything, let it be that sacred promise: never again will their pain be politely forgotten. The silence is over. Their story lives on, and so do they. And as our footsteps fade beyond the crimson walls, let us carry more than just knowledge. We carry the weight of remembrance. In silence they were taken, in whispers they return, not to haunt, but to remind, to break the illusion that history is ever complete. These boys were the unacknowledged authors of empire, and in reclaiming their voices, we do more than see history, we rewrite it. Brick by brick, silence is dismantled, and in its place rises something more human, more enduring, a truth we cannot unknow. So the next time you hear history spoken as triumph without cost, pause, listen for what is missing. For in that hush lies the heartbeat of the forgotten. And now, you've heard it. A story once sealed in shadow now breathes freely. Let that breath ripple outward, a vow kept in every future telling. Let the silence never find its way back again. This is their legacy, and now it is ours too. And so, with the final dust settled and truth spoken at last, we do not turn the page, we hold it open. These boys, once shadows behind embroidered screens, now stand at the center, fragile yet fierce. The halls that devoured their childhoods echo differently now, no longer with silence, but with memory. Let their suffering temper our reverence, their invisibility sharpen our vision. History is no longer theirs to endure alone. It is ours to uphold, to safeguard, to whisper forward. If time teaches anything, it is this: what is silenced will one day speak. And now it has. Remember them not with pity but with purpose. Let their stolen voices rebuild the very meaning of remembrance. Let their names, their pain, their defiant survival shape a legacy unmarred by indifference. If we carry this story close, then their lives were not taken in vain. In honoring them, we begin to write a history that finally dares to tell the whole truth. Let it be remembered, then, not as tragedy alone, but as a reckoning fulfilled. The boys who once knelt in silence have risen, not from tombs or temples, but from truth itself. Their story, fragile and fierce, now threads through the fabric of our collective memory. And in naming them, honoring them, seeing them, we restore something stolen not just from history, but from humanity. The forbidden city stands unyielding, but its silence has finally broken. Let this be the ending that was never written, not of shame, not of sorrow, but of return of voices once lost, now loud with meaning. They were not myths, they were sons. And now, beyond the final curtain and the fading echo, their story is not just heard, it is held, forever. There, in the ruins of memory and empire, they are no longer silent. Their truth, fragile like rice paper yet unburnable, lives within us now. These were no mere shadows of history, they were children, pawns of lust and ritual, whose voices deserved to be shouted, not silenced. In the echo of every empty hallway, in the hush between ancient scrolls, their presence lingers like breath on frozen glass. And though they were told to vanish, we have made them visible. We heard them, we answered. This is how stories survive, by being seen, felt, repeated. So let this final whisper be a promise. As long as memory endures, so will they. Not hidden behind veils of shame, but standing in the open, named and unforgotten. Their lives were taken, their stories stolen, but now they are no longer lost to time. They are returned, and the silence that bound them has come undone, forever.